talk about, meditate on, contemplate the Buddha's worldview, basically. His take on how things exist, his view on happiness and suffering, his view on what's possible. That's all it is. You know, so keep our minds open. Neither swallow it whole nor reject it, that's all. I always figure we're grown-ups, we can bear to listen to things we don't like and keep a mind open about them, which is the mind of a philosopher, isn't it? But the crucial difference here is, from the Buddhist perspective, you practice philosophy. It's not just some interesting idea you keep in your head. You practice it. So we're going to think of this and see what we can take on board, even if we can, you can be a 1% Buddhist, that's perfectly fine. So whatever it is that makes sense, we practice that. Why? Because the bottom line is to lessen our delusions and grow our goodness. That's it. That's Buddha. For our sake and the sake of others. That's why we're sitting here. It's page 69, the refuge prayer. It's expressing that idea in these 4 lines. Sangye cherang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drobha shog sangye cherang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drobha shog sangye cherang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drobha shog. So Churden just mentioned to me, I forgot, that she kindly bought us some postcards. So over the years, I mean, I started running the prison project back in 90-something, and then I stopped 10 years ago, but I've still got contact with quite a few friends in prison. I've known many for 25 years. So I always love to send them postcards, and I can't describe to you how they adore getting postcards. It's unbelievable, They just love getting a little postcard. So what we do is, in different places, like we've got some now, so each one of you could take one, write a little note, dear Fred, wish you were here, whatever, in Lawudo, say whatever you like, and then sign it, you, and then my name at the end. So they know it's from, that we're together. And then if you want, you could donate $1, but it costs about $1 for the card and the postage from Kathmandu. They love getting the foreign stamps, So if you'd like to do that, take a postcard, and then children will collect the dollars if you'd like to offer. Otherwise, don't worry, I'll pay for them. And we post them in Kathmandu, and they're just in heaven getting postcards. So if you'd like to do that.
So how do we get the names?
Oh yeah, so what I'll have to do is get a list. I've got a list. We can't print things out here, can we? But I can send it to you by email, or I can take a shot of it, can't I? What'll I do with that though? We'll work it out. We'll work it out. And you get a person, and I'll tell you about each one.
Robina,
yeah.
One of us could just copy the list down from your iPad.
You mean write them all down? Or yeah, or just yeah. No, it's nice if everyone does it in their own writing, that they see that, you wrote it all. We'll work out a way. What's a simple way to do it? We could do it at the Hyatt. Yeah, we can print them out there. It could be, or you can take the card and write something here and then just wait till you get the name. Or I can tell you the name and then we'll work it out. We'll work out a way. Someone can have them and you can, on someone's computer or phone, you can go to it and have a look and grab one guy and then take their address right there. We can do that. Yes?
Yes.
Children?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. All right, that's one thing. The other one is a couple of people have asked for refuge, would like to take refuge. So, well, first of all, we'll say some things about that now. We did mention briefly, but I'll go to more detail. So the thing is, as far as in our organisation, the way it works is that Rinpoche gives permission to people within the... Okay, so 2 things. There are people in the organisation, like me, for example, like children, we are students of the Lamas, and we work within this organisation, and so then the students of Rinpoche, he would give permission to some of them to do jobs like teach and that kind of thing, give refuge. So for whatever reason, he's given me permission to give refuge. Then others, of course, like the Tibetans, he might invite to a centre. So there's kind of protocol. If there were a resident teacher here, I wouldn't be able to do it. It would be inappropriate, because you give precedence to the person who's the resident teacher here. But given there's no teacher here, resident, then it's appropriate that I would do that. But the crucial point of a refuge, one of the crucial points is this. We'll go into details about what it means and what it is and what it entails. But the really crucial one is because, you know, it's the person, you need to really be clear, the person you take it from is the person you choose to take it from. Because that person will become one of your teachers, you know. So that's really important, you choose. Really important. You're confident that you've checked that person up. You think they're valid. I mean, you can have many teachers. You can have 57 teachers. Don't worry about it, you know. But it's really important. Anything you take, like this formal type of thing, like refuge, bodhisattva vows, anything like that, especially empowerments in tantra, there's no question. You must check carefully and be confident that you're prepared to see that person. You know, you'd have respect for that person and see them as representing the Buddha for you, being the Buddha for you even, you know. So you've got to think about that part, and that's your personal decision. So from my side, I will do it if someone requests and they've done their thinking about it, and so we kind of like, it's like we're doing a contract together, or we're shaking hands on it, and we agree to do our bit. Well, I promise that I'd do my bit, do my very best to help you on your spiritual path, you know, and I won't give you up, I promise. You'll have me for until enlightenment, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. And then I'll do my job the best I can, and you do your job. We agree, and it's sort of, yeah, it's just like that. And I find it very powerful because, like I said, you know, here's me, whoever I am, nobody, but Rinpoche gave me permission, so I do my best to do my job. He told me to teach, etc., etc. So, you know, I got this from my lamas, they got it from theirs, and you track it back, and that's why it's something kind of powerful. I feel it's like plugging into this power source. This power source in an unbroken chain of human beings right back to the time of the Buddha. So I find that very powerful. I like that idea. So there's two things. There's the refuge ceremony. The whole thing takes like 5 minutes. But like I told the other people when they asked, I said, you know, it might take all night if it was Rinpoche. Could give you endless teachings, but I'm a bit lazy, so I'll do it quick. And then the second thing is, at the same time, we can also give the layperson's vows, but you don't need to take them. You can't take the vows unless you've taken refuge. And you don't need to take both, you know. So, yeah, like that. So just to go over roughly again what's involved. So this is the Buddhist teachings give the analogy of the relationship with the Buddha as like a doctor, and it's a good analogy. First, in terms of the responsibility of the doctor, they're not a punisher or a rewarder. They're not your creator. They're an advisor. So in order to go to a doctor, there's two things. There's two things that would determine you're going to a doctor. One is that the reason you go. You don't go because they're cute. You go because you want preventative medicine or you want curative medicine. This is logical. You don't go if you don't have problems and not going to have problems. You don't need to go to a doctor. So here, logically, what we're thinking of, we've got this, you know, crazy minds, and we want advice about how to fix them, both curative and preventative. So clearly, that's the first point, the first criterion for going for refuge to the Buddha, relying upon the Buddha. And the second one, clearly, you've got to be confident that that doctor's a valid doctor. So all you can do is do your best. You read the teachings, you read the books, you look at it, you check out who Buddha was, you look at the advice, and if you've got some confidence that this person's valid, you know, and also it really helps to see current present-day practitioners of this stuff, so it gives you some confidence. So then on the basis of this, then you're prepared, basically. You're qualified to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. So when you take refuge, there's like half a dozen commitments. You're committing to recite morning and night, a little refuge formula, like I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So I'll remind you, 3 times, morning and night. You committing to to do a little bit of study and practice every day. Think about it, obviously. You're committing to at least be nice to sentient beings, don't harm them. You're committing to offer your first mouthful of food and drink to the Buddha. There's a little, in the book there's a little prayer in there, offering the food offering prayer, or you can just in your mind, and it's a really good practice to remind you before you put the food in the mouth mindlessly, And again, there's this idea of this offering business, this giving. It's a very powerful practice. You're also committed to make offerings every day to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And the way we frame that in the Tibetan tradition, you have a little altar. An altar is just this surface, probably not lower than your waist, better to be a bit higher, on which you'd have representations of enlightened body, speech and mind. A statue or a picture of the Buddha or your teacher, whoever, Representation of speech is a book or a mantra, words, and mind is represented by a stupa. And then on that also, a nice little practice in the morning. This is what we do in the Tibetan tradition. And someone asked me before, Catherine asked me, what are these water bowls, you know? So there's all kinds of, you can, making an offering, you can, anything, offering, put a flower. You know, you can make offerings every day, put a flower. You can do anything you like, but there's a tradition from the Vajrayana, from India to Tibet, of putting, they call it making the 8 sense offerings. And it's actually based on very sweet, it's based on a tradition in India where you'd receive a guest. The first thing you'd offer them is, I think I always forget which is which, drinking nectar or feet? Huh? Okay, the first one is you offer a drink when your guest comes. Next is you wash their feet. They must have done that in India. We don't do that, do we? Unless you're the Pope and he washes prisoners' feet or something, doesn't he? Anyway, I'm joking. But you offer them, the next one is water for washing. So, and then the next one is flowers. You give them a flower garland. And they must come in by now, and they're sitting down. Now you get them incense. You know, now you put the incense out. Agam pajam pupe dupe. Next is you turn the lights on. You offer lights. Next is Gende, perfume, getting sexy now. You offer the perfume. Then you offer food. The dinner comes out, and now the dancing call comes out. The last one is music. This is my stupid way of putting it. But it's this little tradition. So the Tibetans carried that on because they're Vajrayana. But then when our teacher came along in the 11th century, and he sort of thought the tantric stuff was all a bit open, you know, and it's meant to be internal. So he decided, he said the water in Tibet was so pure, you could use water instead and visualize the offerings. That's why the water came about. Because he said, you know, this is meant to be secret anyway, because you get attached. If you have these gorgeous offerings on your altar, and it's your beautiful things, you get attached to it. So if the water's so pure, you do these 8 water bowl offerings, and you're visualizing each of those offerings as you put the water in, which is, of course, is emptiness. Nothing has an intrinsic nature. That's how come the water bowls. But there's a series of practices we do, and one of them is, you know, you do a series of 100,000 of different practices. There's these preliminary things we're talking about, you know, that prime your mind to be able to practice better. And one of them is water bowls. And so then you wouldn't visualize those 8 offerings. You just simply visualize whatever you want, nectar or something, and you bless it when you do it, and you make lots and lots and lots of those. So it seems to me on here, these altars, there's just lots of water bowls, not just the set of 8. So what is it about offerings? Why offer, you know? Well, like I said, just karmically, everything we think and do and say leaves a seed, and the mind produces that. So giving is a really powerful practice. It's very obvious. When we talk about the bodhisattva path, there's a way of expressing the final stages of the bodhisattva's practice to, you know, to enlightenment is in the context of the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva. And the first of these is called generosity. So it's the attitude of the bodhisattva there, where their job description is to be of benefit to others. And this very first level is to have this view of wanting to give sentient beings what they need, you know. So we might be, you know, we could be generous, but we tend to be generous only to our loved ones. You know, we give things as long as it's our second. It's not, you know, like you can have my coat. It's only because I bought a new coat. You can have my second and my old coat. We don't mind being generous. We like giving gifts on birthdays, things like this. But we're not. But there's no attitude. There's no real sense of wanting to give. We don't like giving. We'd rather receive. You know. But the way Lama Zopa puts it, bodhisattvas think of giving, don't think of receiving. So it's a powerful practice, and this, in the way it's presented in the 6 perfections, as this sort of the starting point for really recognizing that your job is to be of benefit to sentient beings. Give them what they need. So here, though, of course, we're talking about practicing giving to the Buddhas, which seems, of course, you know, so totally religious, and what's the point of that, you know? So it's not as if here, it's not a question whether a Buddha needs an offering. It's just a very powerful practice from one's own point of view. It's one's own practice, the practice of generosity. It's a way of hugely opening our mind, you know? Removing delusions, opening the mind, and connecting with the Buddhas, connecting with these holy beings whom we are trying to replicate, whose behavior we're trying to replicate, whom we're trying to become like. So it's really got, and Lama Zopa is renowned, himself personally is renowned for his incredible practice of generosity. He, like many of these people, he has nothing in himself, nothing in his own things, but he's given things. So whatever, you know, it's famous for you walk in and have a meeting with Rinpoche, you give him your beautiful statue you just bought and think is so gorgeous, and the next person walks out with it. So you've got to really practice giving up attachment to whatever you give. I mean, like my mother would never have given away anything anybody gave her because she felt it was insulting. She'd been very shocked if she'd given something to Lama Zopa, because the next person would get it. He's like this channel for things. One thing goes in one hand, goes out the other. So if you go up to, maybe you saw his room in Kathmandu, did we go up there? We didn't do that. He was there, that's right. It's just full of things, full of statues, and like you can see here. And I mean, they're all given to him, They're all given to him. Then in turn he gives. He's got so many projects. When you get the annual report about the FPMT's activities, and one of them is Rinpoche's projects, it's completely insane. The number of things he's doing, all the time giving, working on for help, starting old people's homes, and this one's and animal places, and that and this, and giving this for that, and doing thousands of pujas everywhere. Never stops giving. I remember one time in London, some monk came in and Rinpoche gave him his robes, and Roger's walking out to go to the airport. Rinpoche's walking out to go to the airport in his underskirt. So Rinpoche's got to scurry around, Roger's got to scurry around to find this monk to get his robes back, I mean, he's like that. You understand? So he's famous for his giving, which is this really open attitude of whoever's there, whatever they need, give it. It's my job, That's a very powerful practice. We can see that. Huge practice, amazing practice, giving. And I learned that when we did the prison project. I mean, I was editing our magazine, Mandala. It's in California, 94, 95. I'd been there. I arrived in 94. Actually, it's funny how I got there. I was at Kopan. I've been 94, so I've been 15, 20 years I'd been a nun. Wait a minute. Not quite 20 years. I've been a nun. I've been living in the West, living in different countries, different places, doing different jobs. And then anyway, I was at Kopan for a couple of years, and it was heaven to be there, just wonderful. I was editing books and teaching some of the Western courses and things. I got this note, I got this letter from Lama Zopa, and it said he'd checked up, done his divinations, and it came out beneficial for me to go to America, to Vajrapani Institute. He said, no, he said that someone invited me to go, and he checked up, and it was beneficial, very beneficial for you, he said, to go to America. Not so beneficial, very beneficial for others if you go to America, but not so beneficial for you. And it says, if you stay in Kopan, it's very beneficial for you, but not much benefit to others. But of course you decide. Well, I burst into tears. I didn't want to go to America. I mean, I didn't want to go to the West. It was so nice being in Kopan where people leave you alone and mind their own business, And it was just nice to be there and editing books, and I was so happy to be there. So I burst into tears and ran off to Geshe Lama Kontrok. I don't want to go to America. I don't want to go to America. He said, you can decide what. If you don't like it, you can come back, he said. So I thought, oh, well, I better decide to go, be noble. So I went. Anyway, here I am now. I'm an American. I've got an American passport. What to do? I know when I went to my American passport, all these stupid stories. I remember the woman was very curious. The woman who had to see me, in the immigration department, she was my appointment. I was all ready to go and get my passport after 10 years of being in America, having a green card, all that business. And I went there, and she had her name. She was Mrs. Shrestha, because she was married to a Nepalese man. She was trying not to be kind of personal with me, but she was very happy to see me, I could tell. But she had to be professional. So she pointed out her name very strongly. Oh, I'm Mrs. Shrestha. She even showed me a photo of her child in Kathmandu. Anyway, whatever. But I said to her, I remember asking her, can I keep my other passports? So I have Australian and British. She said, we don't mind how many passports you have, as long as you have allegiance to the United States. So I have to practice feeling like an American. I don't know what that means yet. I'm trying my best. Anyway, what am I saying? Go to America, Kopan, what was I talking about?
Mandala.
Who?
Mandala.
Oh yeah, that's right. So anyway, so I was working at Vajrapani Institute, and then international office was just up the road. Vajrapani's in the Redwoods, and then near Santa Cruz is where, in Land of Medicine Buddha, they've also got redwoods, but there was, the international office was there, and so my friend Harvey, who was running it, asked me if I'd edit Mandala. Why am I telling you about this? Was it about the prisoners? Oh, about the prison, that's right. So anyway, I finally took on the job of editing Mandala, and I was based at Land of Medicine Buddha. And we turned it into a magazine. It had been a newsletter before that. We turned it into a magazine. So then I was editing it in 96, February. I got a letter from Arturo, this young Mexican who told me he'd read a book about, he'd read Lama Yeshe's book in this library. He was in this top security prison in California, Pelican Bay, which was built to take the troublemakers off the yards in California, which means the gangs. Gangs were really heavy duty. So he'd read a book of Lama Yeshe. He was in this top security section where he's in his cell 23 hours a day. And they're allowed to have 10 books, a few photos, a pencil, not even a pen, pencil and pad, very limited, very strict, and he's been in prison since he was 12, he told me, in juvenile prison, and in gang since he was 11. He was now like 20 or something, 19, and he'd read this book of Lama Yeshe, and our address was in it. So that's how it started. I wrote to him, and then he wrote back. He wrote to me, then I wrote back and sent him a book, and so it went from there. Within a year, had 40 people writing to us. So what I'm getting at about generosity, I was working for Mandala. I got $400 a month plus my board and keep, So then Mandela had no budget. So I remember, this is how it began for me, the attitude of having the courage to have generosity. The first thing you normally do is someone asks for something, you check up and you say you haven't got it, so you say you can't do it. That's normal. So what happened with this was these letters start coming, and I'd look in my pocket, I'd look in the budget of Mandela, there was no money, you know, but you'd read these letters, and it was compelling. The heart was right there, you know, and being in prisons in America, I mean, excuse me, America's got wonderful qualities, but my God, they're great at prisons. I mean, 25, you know, they've got 5% of the prison they've got 5%. America's got 5% of the world population, but it's got 25% of the prison population. A quarter of all humans on this planet who live in prisons live in American prisons, and it's increasing without Mr. Trump, you know. Unbelievable. I mean, you can't even begin to describe the nightmare of the justice system in America. You just can't. Australia's like paradise in comparison. I mean, Norway, I can't believe it. I had this friend who emailed me, he was so excited, looking forward to going to prison for 2 years. He's going to get educated and do art, and he was waiting excitedly to go to prison for 2 years, like a retreat. Excuse me, in America, oh my God. I remember one fellow who is arrested, American, was arrested in Adelaide in Australia, and he wrote and he said he was so shocked when he got back to America. The Australians chucked him out, and he was given this kind of grey blanket and had to lie on a cell in the county jail on the floor before he was then sent off to a prison. We couldn't even get a pencil. And he said in Australia he had his own little cell, he was able to have a guitar, he had his own, you know, got $12 a week or something. You couldn't believe it. It was like in paradise in comparison. Anyway, whatever. But Arturo was just this young man who wrote, and then within a year, 40 people. Every time another letter would come, and you'd see there was a need, they wanted something, they were begging for a book, and you get nothing. Most of prisons anyway, in most countries, it seems to me, are all working class, are all poor. I've never met a rich person on death row, I promise you, never once. And all the people who wrote, most uneducated, you could tell by how they wrote, and had nothing, and had nobody, and nothing. So when you read these letters, and they want a book, and you look in your pocket, there's no money. You look in Mandela, there's no money. You can't say no. The letter's on my desk. How can I say no? How can I say, no, I can't do it? It's not possible. So we began developing, and then this attitude, you say, I will do it, then you'll find the money. That's the courageous attitude that you're trying to develop of the bodhisattva, you know. I'm not saying I'm a bodhisattva. But because otherwise you just can't, how can I say? That letter was right there. No one else, what am I going to do with it? Put it in the bin? Give it to someone else to do? How could I do that, you know? And it grew from that. And at some point we got to the point where we're having 1,000 letters a month from prison in prison. We had a whole system. We were giving books, we were visiting, taking phone calls. Don't get me started on American prisons. I mean, I think about the phone calls, all these companies, these phone companies making a fortune out of working class families, you know, charging like $20 an hour. I mean, evil, evil, evil. I can't describe to you. If you want to get really upset about the prison project, the prison system in America, look at that amazing documentary on Netflix called 13th Amendment. It's unbelievable. You'll blow by that amazing black woman film director. She's made many movies. What's her name? Unbelievable. You watch it, Chuck, it'll blow your mind. The monstrosity of the capitalist system of the justice system in America, the prison system, especially in relation to blacks and to poor people. It's unbelievable. It's like it makes you sick, you know. It's incredible. Anyway, these people writing. So you couldn't say no. You couldn't say no. You had to say yes. And when you say yes, you open the door to the possibility. You know, so it grew from there. Then I'd just get these books. I'd wrap the books. I'd get deals from the publishers. They'd give us 50%, 80% discount, send the book off. Then another person would write, and another person would write. And then at some point, I remember this one woman, she came along and needed to help. So I said, I'll pay you $5 an hour and you can become the resources coordinator. So prison project grew from there. And then another person came, so then, you know, it just grew from there. But generosity, it was really, for me, and it makes you courageous. It makes you confident. You don't have the money in your pocket, but you have the confidence to say, we can do it, I can do it, we'll find it. And then that opens the door and you find it. And all those years we found the money. Even at some point we were paying salaries to like 9 people. I couldn't sustain it. I did wheeling and dealing and did some investing. I lost lots of money as well. But you know, it's an attitude of courage. And as Rinpoche said, one time when a person wanted to give some money to me for the prison project, and she was selling a house to get some money, and she gave Rinpoche a crystal, and she wanted Rinpoche to write a mantra on it to help get the money. And he said to her, do not think of receiving, think of giving. So it's a very brave attitude, you know, the one of giving. It's very powerful. And it's one's own practice. It's one's own practice, you know. Seeing the need and thinking, what can I do? It's my job. That's the attitude of a bodhisattva. It's like their job description. And whoever's in front of them, it's their responsibility. We'll talk more about that later. So anyway, offerings. So making back to refuge commitments. You make, you make offerings every day on your altar. And it's really something, and you'd start your day with that, It's very powerful. You take refuge, say a few little things. You don't have to even sit down. Just say something, make some offerings on your altar, and make a promise to yourself. Make the most of the day. Watch your mind, watch your body, watch your speech. That's not one of the commitments. I'm getting a bit confused now. I'm sorry, I'm misleading you. So the commitments are, I'll say them again, but I'll best read them out. It's best. And if the person does this, you'd email me, and I'll send you a document that lists all this out, Let me find the correct words for you. Where would it be? Don't remember. Okay. Here we go. All right. Refuge commitments and lay vows. So you get this little document I'll send you, and it's really talking about your motivation for life, or the purpose of my life is to free all sentient beings, and you blah, blah, blah. So for this reason, you want to take refuge. And then general advice, you should rely upon, in general, there are 4 points to the practice of Dharma. Never mind that. Refuge, where is it? Refuge. What is to be avoided? So you've taken, okay, you're committing to, okay, where is it all? A bit messy. I'm sorry, it's a bit messy. I can't find out where to go.
Robina, I've got the email that you sent me.
Who's me? Who's you? Oh, you've got it there. Well, it's the same book. This is the book. Okay, let me see it.
Do you want to see that?
Yeah, you give it to me and I'll read it out.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the letter and the book, is it? Both, isn't it? The book's there too.
That's the advice that you sent.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Books are at the bottom.
Oh, okay, very good. Okay, good. All right. Okay. We'll get the book. That's right. I remember now. Mantra, vows. There we go. Vows. Can't download attachment. No, it's okay. I've got the one in here. I'll do it here, but that's good. I've got it in here as well. So generally there's about half a dozen commitments. You commit to say refuge, morning and night, take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, even just a formula like that. You commit to offer the first mouthful of your food and drink to the 3 jewels, the Buddha. You're committing to make offerings every day in general, which is why it's nice to have a nice altar, because it reminds you. It's there as a reminder, It's like if you want to play tennis, you have a poster of Serena on your wall, don't you? It reminds you what you're trying to become. So altar's like that. Then you make these offerings every day. You can, or even if you don't want to do the 8 cents offerings, you could just put a flower every day. So, so you'd start your day with making the offerings and taking refuge. That's all. You're not committed to sit on your bottom and close your eyes. You're not committed to do that. You're committed throughout the day to be nice to sentient beings, trying to be mean to them, to think about the Dharma a little bit and practice it, learn it a bit, study it. And then you're committed also to have respect for the images, for the things that represent Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So, and again, it's a practice for you. You treat the images with respect, the teachings, you'd put them up high. You see that with Tibetans. I'm not sure if there's text around here. You see them, they put them the highest of all, because that's the one that's your real refuge. The thing you're relying upon is your medicine, the methods, the techniques, So it's an attitude of respect that you are the beneficiary of. The books don't mind. If you treasure something, you put it up high. It's an attitude that you cultivate. So that's essentially it, really. Committing for those things. And then when the vows, like I mentioned the vows, I mentioned those. You can take any of those 5. Yeah, I mentioned all that. So, any questions about that? For those, especially if they were thinking about doing it, to get clarity.
Can you repeat what these are the ones I have. Commit to reciting refuge morning and night. Okay?
Yeah.
Study practice every day.
A little bit,
Food to Buddha.
You what?
Offer your first.
Yeah, first mouthful of food and drink to the Buddha. Yeah, 3 jewels.
Altar with an offering.
Well, the altar's not a commitment, but it's useful to have it, so you can have the images on it, and then you make offerings every day on the altar. That's a really nice thing to start the day with, yes. Well, yeah, pretty much that. That's right. Pretty much that. So I've got here, Alex, you're losing the vows, having taken refuge in the Buddha. Yeah. They say, it's very old-fashioned. It says here, having taken refuge in the Buddha, there's things to do and there's things to avoid. So general advice. What is this? Don't get me confused, this booklet.
1975?
No, not that one. Yeah, the attitude towards the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, even the statues and the pictures, you think of it as the actual Buddha. It's a really good attitude. You should avoid showing disrespect to them, that kind of thing. Having taken refuge in the Dharma, you know, you respect the text and the Sangha, you respect anybody who's living in the Vinaya, monks and nuns. And yeah. I think what you just said was enough. What you said was covering it. It covers it, yeah. But the one thing I would ask you to do, it's not a commitment in terms of refuge, but something I would ask you to do is to do the purification practice at the end of the day. It's so beneficial to end the day with that practice. And you can do it in a very simple way, easy, 5 minutes, just going through those 4 steps, you know, regretting all the rubbish you've done because you're sick of suffering, thinking, whom can you turn to, thinking of the Buddha, and then having compassion for those you've harmed, saying a few mantras to purify, and then vowing to change. You can do it in like a minute, you know. It's a very beneficial practice. I'd ask you to think of doing that every day. And then the vows. So any questions about all that? People? And as I mentioned too, yeah. I would say to us people, if we've been brought up in a Christian culture where you have the idea of a creator, I would say one of the key things is to have this real comfort about no creator. Some people love Buddhism, but they really love the idea of God as a creator. So then it's foolish for them to take refuge as a Buddhist. That's ridiculous. You can use the techniques. I mean, I've had retreats in which Christian Catholic priests and nuns have come. They utilize it, but their bottom line is their faith in God, you know. So if you've got a sense of a creator, then you're not a Buddhist. I remember one time I gave a talk I gave a weekend course in Pune, in India. And all the Indians these days, and so many more are becoming Buddhists. There's the next generation of Indians since the 70s. You know, in the beginning, when I first going to teachings in Delhi, and all the Indians would turn up, they just love Lord Buddha because he's one of their many people. They love Lord Buddha, but they all believe in God. You know, so this particular time in Pune, these young Indians loving the Buddhist teachings and all wanting to take refuge. But then you start to go deeper into it. They've got their commitment. They really do have a view about God. So then I said, you're not a Buddhist. Don't be silly. You like Buddha, but you don't become a Buddhist. Because they have this idea of, you know, God, creator. So you've got to be clear about that one. You've got a comfort level of that, then that's a good start if you want to be a Buddhist, you know. And then the idea is you check up, like I said, the doctor. There's two bases for taking refuge. One, you know you want the methods, and 2, you've got confidence in the person. And that can only come from your own research. You have to be confident. You have to feel confident from what you've looked at, what you've thought about, what you've heard, what you've read, what you've seen. That seems like, you know, you don't have to understand it all. Doesn't have to believe in it all. It's not a question of that. But being prepared to work on it, you know, step by step, taking Buddha's advice. Does it make sense, people? If there's no questions, we can then talk about something else. Yes, go.
So the vow about intoxicants
Yes.
and alcohol.
Yes.
Why is that a vow? Like, what's the?
Okay. The whole point of the first level of practice in Buddhism, the one of behavior, controlling your body and speech, because, you know, because we're driven by attachment. We're in this attachment realm, driven by attachment. And because senses, this body of 5 senses is the product of the karma of attachment over countless lives, then given that attachment runs the show, then it's obvious when your senses are out of control, you're berserk. Is it not? So they always talk about alcohol. There's always a hilarious story they tell. This always shows how women are the problem. We're naughty. There's this one story about this ridiculous monk who visits this woman. And for whatever bizarre reason, she wants him to kill a goat, have sex with her, or drink alcohol. Why he just didn't say, I'm out of here, lady, goodbye, I don't know. But he tried to make her happy. So he decided the best of a bad lot was to drink the alcohol. Well, then, of course, he had sex with her and killed the goat as well. They always say that then alcohol from which many problems arise. I mean, I love that story. It's true, it's obvious, we can see. When your senses, when you're out of control, when the mind's berserk, attachment, and it's servants of the body and speech after all. I mean, I remember, I didn't like alcohol much. Oh, my preference was marijuana, you know. But I remember one time, really intensely strong hashish, I was lying in the middle of a freeway out of my brain. It's a miracle I didn't get killed, you know. I mean, I mightn't go, you don't usually try to kill people when you're not, you know, alcohol makes you violent, but I think marijuana doesn't make you violent, it just makes you ridiculous. You've got no control, you know, you're gone, you're lost. You just have a good sleep and wake up and start again. So it's clear, you know, things that alter you, strongly affect your senses. Strongly. There can be advantage. I remember I learned a lot from drugs, you know, because you suddenly, your mind changes, so it helps you see things in a different way. But from the Buddhist perspective, it's only, you know, it's still gross level. Your senses is a body, and you've got to, when you have concentration, you go beyond your senses. That's why even the most, you know, many religions, I mean, some of the, you know, South Americans and even the Hindus, they're into their hashish, you know. But it's still the body, it's still the senses, it's a gross level of consciousness. We've got to go beyond that, to beyond the senses, beyond the grosser level. So there can be some advantage, but you know, you can only go so far with it. You've got to learn to control the mind, discipline the mind, have complete control over the mind. So then you get, you know, then everything's perfect, then works perfectly. So the one of intoxicants makes a lot of sense. But I'm always wondering why the vow was only alcohol, when in India at that time, all these Hindus, part of their deal was to smoke hashish. Why they didn't say hashish as well, I don't understand it. That's very odd, isn't it? It was alcohol. Intoxicants. But I know with His Holiness, when he gives his vow, because he knows most, you know, he always uses he knows, it's two things. When he gives a killing vow, he only gives it as murder, killing humans. Because he knows most Western people, the thought of not wanting to kill even an ant or a cockroach is very hard for us. So he's so kind. He alters the vow, but I have no power to do that. I have to give the vow as it's written, you know. Don't kill any sentient being. And the one of alcohol, he always quotes the precedent of one old Gompa. Gompa's a part of Tibet, and they're like the warriors, you know, and they're famous for liking their chung, which is fermented barley business. It's like a white, very strong liquid, a very strong alcohol. So he was taking refuge in the lay vows from Ling Rinpoche, who's the Dalai Lama's main guru, His Holiness Ling Rinpoche. And he was taking it, and then when the old fellow discovered he'd got a vow not to drink alcohol, he said, "Oh no, I can't give up my chung." So then the Ling Rinpoche says, "It's okay, just don't get drunk." So His Holiness always gives a vow like that to Western people. But I don't have the permission to do that. I've taken it, you know, I've received it from Rinpoche, and this is the way I've been taught it, so I always give it as don't have any alcohol. So of course if you want to have your alcohol every day, you don't take that vow. It's very easy, very simple. So that's why having vows, like I said to you, again, the power of vows for Buddha is just stupendous. And for me, that's why I'm a nun. Why would I want to walk around with bald head and 14th century clothing? Well, it's cheaper for a start. My clothing budget's like $5 a year, you know. So, it's just that somehow I like the idea of the power of vows. The 24 hours a day, you're having this wish to live a life of virtue and morality and non-harming, and the vows like this powerful, like I said, the Buddha's view, it's like a subtle physical form visible to clairvoyance. There's something so potent about this decision to live in this vow, you know, that you've received from somebody who tracks it back to the Buddha. 24 hours a day you're living in this vow without even being aware of it. The power of vows is such that you're purifying the habit to do those things. That works at a very deep level. And then you're strongly creating strongly putting lots of delicious karmic seeds into your non-killing, non-lying, non-stealing bank vaults. So this is where, for me, very powerful, this example of why vows are so powerful and why we should have such compassion for humans. So there's always these two examples, these two little boys. Their mothers told me the stories. One was the little boy who was a fisherman, she said from the time he was tiny, as soon as he went fishing, he fell in love with fishing, basically. So what's going on here is this. And then, okay, the other story was a little boy who had compassion for the lice in his own head, 3 years old, crying with compassion for lice. And he's 40-something now, if not 50, and he's never killed a living being. So the difference is this. On the one hand, each of them has got a human birth. So that first level of karma, the type of rebirth you get, each of them at the time of their past death, one of their virtuous karmic, non-killing karmic seeds was triggered that caused them to be born to a human mummy. They both got the human birth from one track of karma. The next level of karma is where the difference is, and this is the tragedy. So the little boy who was the fisherman, we can deduce he'd been in the lower realms in the past as a result of killing. He finished that karma. He finished the main results of that karma. It ran out after the lower realm rebirth, suffering. He finally got a human birth again. But the tragedy was he hadn't purified the residual results of killing, which manifest even in a human life where you continue to kill, where you get killed or die young, or where you have a lot of environmental suffering. They're the three residual results left over from the main karma. So the difference between him and the other little boy, he woke up in this life with no thought to kill, even had compassion for the lice in his own head. So we can deduce he'd indeed had lower realm suffering, but he'd also lived in vows in which he had vowed never to kill again. He vowed never to steal again, never to lie, never to steal, never to harm. So next life he wakes up with a human body, but he's got no tendency to kill, no tendency to lie, no tendency to steal. He's completely cleaned up all aspects of the karma. That's the benefit of vows. So it's mainly long term for next life. So if you look at the human realm, all these people won the lottery, got a human birth. But look at humans. Most kill something. Most have a tendency to kill. It's the normal thing in our world. Even most religions teach that it's okay to kill certain beings. I was taught as a Catholic, God made these other beings for humans' benefit. I remember some Christians in America, they feel it's an honor to go and hunt and kill the creatures and eat them because God made them for us. They're doing God's will. So it's very interesting, the viewpoints. So we're born as human, but look at the world, We have a tendency to kill. This is the worst one. And because of that, you send yourself straight back to the lower realms. Because killing is the worst one. Like I said, one person, I think it was Lama, somebody, I remember one Lama. What's one piece of advice you could give a person from Buddhism? Don't kill. That's it. At least refrain from not killing. That one most. Nothing else. Just that alone. Eat just that. Amazing. And this is the way karma works. It's very tragic, So, like I mentioned before, there's these three categories of states of mind. The delusions, the neuroses, the virtues, and then the mechanics. That's my term. Intention, attention, discrimination, many, many of these. That anybody, whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you have these, Mindfulness is one of them, and that's called, it's just really just the not forgetting what you're doing moment by moment. It's not any holy thing. It's treated like something holy. It's just the ability to not forget what you're doing. And anybody needs that. As Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness, So all these different parts of our mind, this third category, that enable us to do whatever we're doing well. So there's one of those, which seems an odd one to us, like I mentioned, but I want to go to this further now. It's very fascinating, this. This is the tragedy of samsara. It's called feeling. And basically the mind has the capacity to have pleasant and unpleasant and neutral feelings. It's not meant in the equivalent of what we call emotion. We have either pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, or neutral feelings. Let's forget the neutral. So like we talked before, attachments under the heading of negative, it's a neurosis, it's a delusion. So its job, this emotional hungriness, this junkiness, its job is to find whatever objects out there that we have karma with, such that when we have contact with them, a pleasant feeling is triggered. And this is the thing about samsara. We're in these gross bag of bones. We live in walking sewers, don't we? This body is something repulsive, really. You think what's inside it. We'd vomit and be sick if we cut ourselves open and looked at it. Not being horrible. So attachment's job, because we're always hungry, we're always emotionally hungry, and the only method we know to trigger pleasant feelings in our mind is objects of senses. That's the only method we know. That's the samsara. So that's what we spend our lives doing. Attachment is constantly looking for objects such that when we have contact with them, it triggers pleasant feelings. That's the only method we have for triggering pleasant feelings. So there's this little boy. born to a nice mummy in California, won the lottery, got a human birth. Second, all his tendencies. He's a kind person, generous, intelligent, but he had a tendency to kill from not having finished it in the past, not having purified the tendency. Third, experiences similar to the cause. He had a good life. People were kind to him and generous and loving, but he had also the experience of past killing. He died young, when he was 29. He died scuba diving. And his mother had heard about the teachings in Kopan, and she came to my room crying. She said, where would he be reborn? He spent his life fishing. When he was 5 years old, he met fishing, whatever happened. And he fell in love with it. So what happened is this. He got the human birth. He hadn't purified his killing, all the residual results of it. So he sees fishing. It triggers like a memory. That's what happens, you know. It triggers a memory. The karma ripens. And he sees this scenario called fishing. It triggers a memory of it. And then what happens is, immediately, it triggers a really delicious feeling. He gets a lot of pleasure. And then instantly, attachment takes over and makes it look divine. Because if we feel good, if you see a person who makes you feel happy, you know, especially if it's, you know, like sexual one, you see this handsome person, instant karma between you, like Romeo and Juliet meeting, you know. I was thinking West Side Story. It's on my iPad. I was, you know. And then Maria and Tony at the dance, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it? The sharks and the jets all dancing. And then they see each other and everything else disappears. And suddenly, karma ripens. That's how it is with things. You know, whether it's torture or killing or food, or the karma you have with something, you meet it and it triggers an incredibly blissful feeling. And then if there's a blissful feeling, attachment grabs it. Now it's found it. And then it will make the object look completely divine. So Tony looked like God incarnate to Maria. Well, fishing to this little boy looked like heaven. I remember even there's an Australian journalist who was the arts writer for the Time magazine for like 40 years. He's dead now. He wrote a lot of history about Australia, Robert Hughes. And he wrote about his first experience of going trout fishing. He described it as like a cosmic experience. All that means is he had such heavy karma to kill that it triggered unbelievably blissful feelings in his mind and body. And then attachment took over and made it look completely sublime. That's the relationship between pleasant feelings and attachment for us. So we completely buy into that story. We completely buy into it. So he had no choice but to keep killing, because obviously whatever makes you feel good was him for fishing, and then attachment makes it look delicious, which means he was as blind as a bat. And all those years, from 5 to 29, that he was a professional fisherman, he saw those fish in his boat dying an agonizing death. But he could never see suffering because he saw it through the lenses of his own attachment that made it look delicious. So obviously the thing that makes you, give you good feelings, of course you want to do it again. That's the whole point. So imagine if he had the karma to want to kill poodles. He'd have to do it at night. If you been put in, he would have been hanged if he was found killing poodles. But it's because it's fish. No one minds, you know. It's our culture. But this is the tragedy of karma. The karmic connection is there from having done it before. You meet the scenario again, whether it's Tony or Maria, whether it's killing or it's killing fish or stealing, whatever the thing is, you've got the karma with it. You haven't purified the tendency to do it. You meet the scenario, it triggers a delicious feeling, it's like the memory comes back, and then attachment kicks in and paints a divine picture of it. And that's what you see in your mind. And then of course you keep doing it because it gives you good feelings. That's the logic of samsara, and that's the tragedy of samsara. That's the tragedy. He was an intelligent person, but he was completely addicted to fishing. That was his entire life. Everything was seen in terms of his fishing, you know. And because he lived in a culture where it was not considered bad, he never questioned it. His mother said she never liked going fishing. She didn't like killing. She didn't teach him this. She didn't want to disrespect him, so she never criticized. And she said, one time he always invited her to go fishing with him, and she never wanted to go. But one time she went. And this is the point. Because she didn't have a tendency to kill, therefore she didn't have attachment to killing, therefore she could see nakedly the truth. The fish were suffering. It was evident to her. But fish die quietly. They don't scream and squeal like a pig would. There's no red blood spurting out. You have to bash them on the head to subdue them. They've got no legs and arms, the poor things. The best they can do is wriggle their bodies, you know, with their little eyes open. They make no sound. So this is the point. This is how karma works, you know. Everything we see is through the lenses of what's in our mind. As Lama Zopa puts it, which is the way the Buddhist psychology talks, the whole world out there appears back to us in the aspect of whatever's in our mind. So because he had a tendency to kill, when he met it, it triggered the memory, feeling arose, a delicious feeling arose, and then attachment takes over and makes it divine. So it's concluded, of course he's going to become a fisherman. He found his purpose in life. And he was a nice guy. The same as, I'm always quote this one too, watching a show about the Inuits. We call them Eskimos, you know. Their culture, they bash baby seals to death. That's what they do. He was really almost in tears, this fellow. How dare these animal rights people criticize my culture? I learned this from my father. He got it from his father. So, you know, due to that karma, you're born in a scenario where you do that. Now, he didn't bash his wife. It was just baby seals, because the karma's there. And he never saw suffering. But anybody with half a brain can see the baby seal suffering. Blood spurting, you know, trying to get away. He couldn't see it. This is why, this is talk about ignorance. Talk about the lion not seeing the suffering of the buffalo. Look at humans. Because of attachment. This is attachment. Fishermen don't hate fish. The Inuit didn't hate baby seals. This is attachment, not even anger. Blind, you make us blind as a bat. We see things in the aspect of whatever is in our mind, you know. So it makes us feel good, we call it good. It shows how intensely self-centered we are. So aren't we lucky not to have the tendency to want to kill or torture or steal or lie? I mean, the best we do is eat too much food. Look how hard that habit is to change. This is the mechanics of how samsara works, you know. It's very heartbreaking. And we're such junkies for good feelings. We're junkies. So anything that triggers a good feeling, we will do it again. And if the world doesn't approve, we'll do it secretly. You read about these torturers. There was one fellow in America years ago, in Kansas, I think. They didn't have death row there, so he's got to spend a life in prison. I think he called himself BTK, bind, torture, kill. You heard about him, Chuck? And he spent like he was a good man, nice Christian, had a family, went to church every day, you know, had a whole ordinary life, then he had his secret life. Because he was addicted to torture. And he had this whole elaborate scenario that he made up. That's what attachment does. Attachment's very creative. It makes up these wonderful scenarios. So he had this secret cellar, and he'd kidnap people, especially more than one, because he wanted to see them suffering with each other. Had this whole elaborate scenario that he created. For 30 years, killed like 30 people. Bind them, torture them, kill them. Secret life. Addicted to it, since he's born. So we just go, oh, what a monster. Send him to hell, you know. This is karmic imprints. Can you imagine? Karmic imprints. He'd be surprised, but he'd be the one who doesn't know why he wants to do it. I remember one other fellow, Jeffrey Dahmer, one American fellow who you know, killed people, tortured and killed people, ate their brains and tucked their skulls in the fridge and all that kind of thing. We just think they're monsters. We can't stand to think about them. He said, since he was a tiny boy, no one taught him, he was compelled to torture creatures, and he got incredible pleasure from it. It's habit, karma. In this habit, you know, habit. He doesn't know why. The fisherman doesn't know why he likes fishing. This torture didn't know. My BTK didn't know why. He knew he had to do it. He was compelled. I mean, we shouldn't be so arrogant. Can you imagine having born with that tendency? Look at our pathetic tendency. We can't say no to cake, you know. Do you understand? These karmic imprints in our head. Since we're tiny, no one taught us. So can you imagine having the compulsion to jump on little girls all day to have sex? Your poor mind is tormented with this. One of my friends on death row, Mitch told me about. I know this guy. He thinks of torture all day, he said, Robina. He's a laid-back guy, very friendly, but his mind obsessed all day. His thoughts can't control. Look at our pathetic thoughts, how we can't control. So can you imagine being born that way? Talk about compassion. Torture, nightmare, you know, since tiny. No one teaches you these things. Tormented by it. Karmic imprint, you know, from habit, because you haven't purified it. So living vows, for the Buddhist perspective, taking the reincarnation as the concept, is the most potent, most powerful, most marvelous way to clean up these old ridiculous habits. So that you wake up next life with no thought to kill, with no thought to harm, with no thought to lie, steal and do the rest. How incredible, what a miracle. Like be a virtuous person and therefore be a happy person. Like a miracle from your own past practice. That's the power of vows. As Lama Zopa says, just being good is not enough. There's not enough power in our good actions now. Our virtue isn't that strong. So, but having the power of vows, where you commit yourself, you vow, you're saying, I'm vowing to be a moral person. You define yourself in those terms. And that's why if you think of the fisherman, it was like for him, he was vowing. His whole life was in terms of being a fisherman. He saw himself through the lenses of being a fisherman. That's how he defined himself, which is why the karma is 1,000,000 times heavier than just killing a fish occasionally, you know. So vows are very amazing. Hugely purify the habits and create virtue. And it's psychological. We're talking the mind here, not religion, the mind. Attachment's the killer. It's amazing. Attachment's the killer. Attachment seems, it's like it masquerades as goodness. This is why it's so, I mean, anger is evidently horrible. Killing is evidently awful. I mean, killing from anger, harming others out of anger is so clearly horrible. But it's really hard to see the suffering of attachment. It masquerades as kindness. It's benign, you know. People don't torture out of anger. People don't. The BTK didn't hate those people. Fishermen don't hate fish. Maybe rapists have anger. We confuse it with sex, isn't it? It's just anger. That's just violence, isn't it? Attachment, you know, is the killer. This hunger in us, and then habits. So bad enough being attached to eating too much cake. You know, bad enough to that. I mean, this cake doesn't mind. But attached to killing, attached to torture, attached to that kind of thing, you know. That's where it's so shocking. Habit, the karmic imprint, the habit. So we have to purify the habits, clean them up, finish them. For our sake, not to mention the sake of others. That's the power of vows. Like defining yourself as a moral person, defining yourself as a virtuous person, a person who wants not to harm others. That's pretty incredible on this planet. Pretty amazing, you know. And that's the first level of practice. Don't harm others, that's it. Not even talking about being kind yet, just don't harm them. Pretty amazing. Any questions from all that? So strange talking to the door. I can't get over it. I'm talking to Chen Razig over there too. And I'm talking to Miller Raper. Any questions, people? Any questions?
Can I ask you a question?
Go for it, darling.
The BTK killer or the
Yeah.
you know, murderer.
Whatever, that's fine.
What was their previous life like then for them to become a killer in a reincarnation? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you killed before, that's it.
Oh, okay.
That's it. You killed before. I mean, I would say, you know, it seems to me, if you look at animals again, I'm not trying to be mean about animals, but look at animals' behaviour without any judgment, without any being mean, without any hierarchical views. They torture each other. Look at a spider. A spider doesn't want to just eat a fly, it wants to kill the fly first. It won't eat a fly that you give it. It wants to kill it first. Look at animals, how they harm each other. Look at a snake. We just, see, in our world we call it natural. But what do you think natural means? It's a habit. So as animals, I think we do the most shocking harm to each other out of complete and total and utter ignorance. So those habits remain in the mind. In the same way that I talked about the ants having this ingenious ability to be like good engineers and architects in their little anthill, that's from the tendency of being a human. But then you got born as an ant due to attachment. The other way around, due to having been an animal, but then one day your karma to be a human ripens from another karma, but your tendencies brought from the animal birth, which you haven't purified, then will kick in and you'll be born with this habit to torture, habit to rape, habit to kill, habit to all the other things, to harm sentient beings and get immense pleasure from it. Do you understand? Yes.
You mentioned the Indian.
Yeah, that's right.
People.
Yes.
Well, that's their survival.
But that's an interpretation of it.
Well, what's their option?
But that's an interpretation of it. Okay, that's the point about animals. Yeah. There is no option. That's the tragedy of it. That's the whole. But you're just stressing the point. That's the tragedy. You don't have an option, and that means due to such strong karma, you're born into a scenario where you have no choice but to keep doing it. That's the tragedy of samsara. That's the answer.
What would we do with all those natives?
Huh?
We'd have to relocate them.
But that's not our. You can't talk that way. It's not our job to do that. You can't talk that way. That's not the point. I mean, you can't do that. You can't stop all the animals and lions from stop killing the buffaloes. I mean, it'd be hard work trying to stop all the animals killing each other. You just got to observe it and look at the suffering of it and understand the cause of it and then vow not to do it again yourself. And if you can, help other people. That's the whole point. That's the point about karma. The habit is so strong that causes you to be born in a scenario where you have no choice. That is the point about karma, why it's so tragic, why we should have such compassion. Do you understand? Someone else? Questions? Points? Huh?
A few days ago, I think you mentioned that it could be a good sign or something when you have these violent dreams.
Dreams?
Yeah. When there happens a lot of aggression and...
Could be, yeah.
So it could be a kind of purification depending on what
Well, yeah, yes, it could be.
come with it.
Mm. Yeah, and they, for example, they say you dream of, say, a lot of water. That's a sign of purification. Like, you have a lot of fear, being attacked. That could be a very strong sign of purification. I remember a dream I had. Just an example. I don't have many. I can't remember my dreams lately. But I remember it was when I was first in my first retreat after becoming a nun. Actually, it was a funny dream. I'll tell you. And I'd been reading. my lamas opened up me Gelugpas, right? I didn't know anything about lamas on Kapa. I just knew I met them, and this was my job. I was going to become a nun. I didn't care what I had to do. I was going to become a nun. This one. I jumped into their lap. My first teachings were from them, right? So I became the Gelugpa by default. And Lama Tsongkhapa's our guy, right? He's our lineage Lama. So I never liked his name. I didn't like him much. I didn't know who he was. I didn't feel close to him. I read his biography one time. So I was in a retreat, a Tara retreat in Dharamsala, a month after I became a nun. And I remember reading this biography about him, and I was very bored by it. Nothing moved me. I heard about how he had a connection to Manjushri. So anyway, I had a dream in the early morning. They say the morning dreams are the most powerful. So I had this dream, and it was a terrifying dream. I was trying to find this person to warn them that they were being chased. And every time I got to where they were, they'd gone, It was terrifying. I remember getting onto this big boat, and I went into the cabin of the person, and I opened the bag, and now it was my luggage. It was me who was being chased. I was terrified. And then suddenly this comical kind of 1930s detective type scenario, the door opened, and this kind of detective guy with a hat came in, and I woke up with absolute terror, saying, and she was killed right through by Manjushri's sword. Well, that was a good dream. Do you understand? Then I loved Lama Tsongkhapa from then on. It was a very funny dream. When I realised it was me being chased, it was like beyond terror. I can't describe it. I woke up with absolute terror. It depends on your dream, What else? Yes.
Can you talk about purification of karma? Say, is there a point which, no matter how many bodhisattva meditations you can do, it's too late?
There's never too late. No, sorry, that's not true. It's all a question of time. So let's just say, a good example. Let's say, I always think of this example. I'm on a hill, and I can see you driving from this direction over here at 73 miles an hour, and I can see this other car over here driving at 42 miles an hour, and I calculate that in 3.5 minutes you're going to crash. So if you continue to drive exactly as you're driving, you will crash. But what if you put your foot on the brake? So if you put your foot on the brake a little bit too late, you might just hit them on the side. If you put your foot on the brake early enough, you'll even avoid the crash. So it's a question of timing. Do you understand my point? That's purification. So there's no karma you can't purify. It's all impermanent. There's no karma you can't purify. It's a question of how much and how strong and how soon before the event. So some people, for example, get cancer. They'll all go to the same doctor. Some of them, the karma's so strong that it's too late to change it. Other people, there's still enough time, so by taking medicine, their virtue ripens and they're able to cure the cancer. So it's a question of timing. But theoretically, there's no karma you can't purify. Do you understand? So in other words, if if the seed's about to ripen as you getting killed in 3 days' time, then you're not going to avoid it. But if you do powerful enough work now, you could make it less. Like if you're about to have a crash and drive off the cliff, maybe just hit a tree instead. So you rejoice, I only hit a tree, I didn't die. Do you understand? It's like that a bit.
That's good news.
Yeah. So that's why, in general, if you have this Buddhist view, every time anything ripens, it's that, either the fruit of your virtue or the fruit of your negativity. And either way, every time. So for the bodhisattvas, they're sad to have good things happen because they're using up their merit. They'd rather have a bad thing happen, So every time a bad thing happens, you think, great, you just purified that bit, Don't have to experience that one again. So the point about purification too is that, this practice of the 4 powers, regretting and all those business, this is a super powerful way of controlling all the seeds. You put atomic bombs on the seeds that prevent them from ripening as suffering, and you purify your habit to keep doing them. But it doesn't totally purify things. Only when you realize emptiness do you actually cut the root of all suffering. So it sort of keeps control over it. It stops the stuff from ripening. In that way, it's super powerful. But it doesn't finally purify. You don't finally purify until you get to the root of the problem by realizing emptiness and cutting the root delusion, which is the source of all the suffering. Then then you bypass it all. It's not as if you have to pull out all the weeds one by one. If you realize emptiness now, then you won't have to experience the suffering. There's still karma left over that you will, but you can't create more. So it's the quickest way, the most direct, quick way to purify everything is realize emptiness. Do you understand? That's what they say. And you can almost say, the way we are now with so many past karmic imprints in the mind from past lives, that if we stop creating karma from now, it doesn't really work like this, and you just had to run out all the karma you created, you'd never end. So we've got to get past it, and we've got to bypass it and put atomic bombs under it by purifying, vowing not to do again, so you get ahead of the game. And then eventually you've got the merit and the chance to actually get the real realizations of removing all the delusions from the mind. First realizing emptiness and then perfecting all of that. And then you're really ahead of the game. Then you can't fall back. Then from there you can't fall back. From the first second you've realized emptiness, you can't fall back. After that, you've got a lot of work to do still, to finish, but you can't fall back. That's the paradigm shift we have to make. That's the point at which Buddha diverged from the previous Hindus, in relation to the nature of reality, particularly of the self and of everything else. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Sweetheart.
So bodhisattva is a purification deity?
Well, it's not. Go on. Keep going. That's the question.
Well, I guess I just realized recently when I heard it or read it that bodhisattva is a tantric form of the Buddha.
That's right.
Why is it important, or why is it in the tantric form that this purification occurs?
I understand, darling. I understand. So let's talk about the Buddha now. Okay. So Buddha, the word Buddha, like I said before, the word Buddha, or the absolute Buddha, the ultimate Buddha, actual Buddha is the unmanifest, all pure, all wise, all compassionate, all pervasive consciousness. Okay? Mm-hmm. That's actual Buddha. But out of compassion, because compassion is what has impelled a person to become a Buddha over countless lifetimes, and countless beings have become Buddha. Do you understand? So what's compelled them to do that is compassion. The wish to help others. Well, hanging out in super state of subtle bliss, what good is that to peanuts like you and me? So the Buddha, that mind, they manifest in bodies to help us. Okay. So we'll talk more about the Bodhisattva path, why not say it now? So, you know, the Bodhisattva path is kind of outrageous. I can't even always talk about the Bodhisattva path. It's so outrageous, you know. The levels of compassion that we can cultivate are beyond what we would call, beyond radical. So extraordinary. So even the lowest level Bodhisattva has the power already to manifest their mind in 100 different forms simultaneously. Bodies of any kind to support and benefit sentient beings, right? So, but in general, the two types of bodies a Buddha would manifest in for the benefit of sentient beings. One is, so in terms of the way we see the Buddha, the form of Shakyamuni, the picture's up there, right? All these little that banner up there. That's the monk. That's Mr. Shakyamuni, the prince in India, and that's a manifestation of the first stages of practice, which is junior school and high school, which is controlling your body, speech, and mind. He is a manifestation of that. He's a manifestation of that level of practice, controlling your body, speech, and mind, subduing, discipline, good ethics, not harming sentient beings. That's a manifestation, and that's the form in which the Buddha takes to teach the first stages of practice. You could say like that. Now you've got the more advanced level of practice, which is the Mahayana path, and in particular the Vajrayana, which is Tantra. So the form in which the Buddha takes there is all these other pictures, you know, all these other ladies and gentlemen with all eggs and lambs and legs and arms and Lord knows what. So this is the Bodhisattva aspect. And it's also in the aspect of Tantra. So the psychology of Tantra, the psychology of the first level is control your body, speech, and mind. That's it, because we're berserk, we're driven by attachment. So the whole point is to get the discipline of completely harnessing the energy of our body, speech, and mind to the point where we're effortlessly blissful and controlled and perfect. Now we can join the Bodhisattva path, and then we can go into the Tantric level, and then the Buddha would manifest in these different forms that show us how we can utilize also all the delusions and the attachment. So all these forms of the Buddha are like these blissful, joyful aspects. They're like decorated with gorgeous things. So this aspect is meant to make our mind joyful, to lift us. Do you understand? It's not to subdue the delusions, but in Tantra, everything is grist for the mill. All the delusions are grist for the mill. So the Tantric practitioner can utilize the anger, utilize the attachment, utilize all the delusions on the path to enlightenment. So these are manifestations of different qualities that either you want to cultivate, for example, compassion over there, he's got 1,000 arms out of his immense compassion to benefit sentient beings. So all these things in that picture represent different qualities. Then you've got another Buddha called Vajrayogini, like I mentioned, and she's this gorgeous naked red lady, and she is the manifestation of purified desire energy. So there's all these thousands of different Buddhas that are all manifestations of different qualities you want to cultivate or different qualities you want to purify. Do you understand? So the essence of all of those Buddhas, or the manifestation of Buddha in the Tantric aspect, is called Vajradhara. Okay, he's blue, and he looks like he's in the monk form, and he's blue, and it's the Tantric aspect of Buddha. Shakyamuni is the Sutra aspect of the Buddha. Vajradhara is the Tantric aspect of the Buddha. Do you understand? In this joyful form with jewels and looking gorgeous. Do you understand? So under Vajradhara, so over to the right, if you have a little kind of graph or a family tree or what do you call those things, like showing all where people are linked to each other. I forget the word for that. Genealogy. That kind of thing. So you have Buddha, absolute Buddha. Then you have going down to the Rupakaya, form body, divided into two. You've got in terms of Sutra, you've got Shakyamuni Buddha. In terms of Tantra, you've got Vajradhara. So you go to the right and you have a white version of Vajradhara, and he's called Vajrasattva. So he is a white manifestation. Is white color, same as Vajradhara, but he's the Tantric aspect of Buddha. Then under them, you've got 5 Buddha families. Akshobhya, the purification of the manifestation of purified anger. Amitabha, the purified aspect of attachment, and there are 5 of them, and and under those 5 are all the other millions of Buddhas, all in those different psychological qualities, and they all fit into that structure. Do you understand? So Vajrasattva, I think I've heard he's a manifestation of emptiness. He's like emptiness. So he holds a Dorjian bell. So does Vajradhara. But Vajrasattva is what over the centuries, the traditions over the centuries from Vajrayana India to Tibet, the particular practice that happens to be said to be really useful to use when you do the purification is Vajrasattva. But you can use any Buddha you like. It's just one of the techniques that's been developed over the centuries. That's all. Do you understand? It's the actual Buddha in the tantric form, particularly for purification. And he represents, I think, emptiness, because emptiness is the actual purification finally. Something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you can use any old Buddha you like. They're all the same. It's just traditions, certain techniques that have been cultivated over the centuries. Do you understand? Yeah. Yes.
To follow up on that, I actually have two questions, but to follow up on this is, where's Siddhartha on that family tree?
That's Shakyamuni Buddha.
Okay, Shakyamuni.
So that was the person, that's his name before he became the Buddha. So that's the way they depict him, having become the Buddha under the tree in Bodh Gaya. Siddhartha, when he became the Buddha, he got known as the Great Muni, Shakyamuni, or whatever. So that's just him looking like a monk as opposed to when he looked like a prince.
Okay.
Didn't you understand?
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay.
That's it.
Just wanted to clarify.
That's it, yeah.
All right, thank you. And then my second question.
Yeah.
It says here that there's nothing we know that we haven't learned from others.
Well, I would suggest that's true, don't you think?
Well, and then earlier you mentioned Einstein and the theory of relativity, and it kind of contradicts that. In my
I understand. But surely what he did learn came from what he learned from others. And then he was able, on the basis of that, to go further and come up with this view of something that no one else had come up with. But he was a dependent, but what he'd learned, everything else came from knowing. But he went on from what he'd learned from others, and that's the same with the Buddha. He went further than what he'd got so far, and he concluded, you understand what I'm saying? So I think in general, though, the point I'm trying to make, I suppose, is we rely upon others to learn to know what we learn. If we had to reinvent the wheel every time, it would be like insane. Your point is good. I agree with you. Your point is good.
But so you don't discount original thought, but it all comes from...
Well, okay, just a minute. Just a second. Original thought. You mean Einstein coming up with something that no one else had come up with? Or Steve Jobs coming up with an iPad or an iPhone? It's true. It is true. It is true. But it's still, you can see the logic that all the thinking he did so far came from what he'd learned so far, and then he took those things and he continued and went further with it. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's something the same with the Buddha. Mm. What else, people? Is something else? Questions? Yes, sweetheart.
So in the scenario you were talking about where you maybe say you meet someone and you feel there's a strong connection, and maybe it's a karmic connection.
Well, that's the Buddha's view. You wouldn't meet them if you hadn't met them before, and the strength of the way you relate to each other is the strength of the past karma you've got. That's the logic for it.
Yeah. So if you have, like you say, a pleasant experience being around this person,
yes,
and then you start to develop an attachment, and
that's
you
right.
see your own mind coming up with these crazy kind of thoughts.
That's
about
right.
This person,
Mm.
which has nothing to do with them. It's all to do with your own mind.
Mm-hmm. Then?
What do you do with that? Like you don't, not act on it, but just watch it?
But you know the answer, Monique. You hear the story and you argue with it.
Okay. Yep.
That's it. Okay. It doesn't mean it's easy. Imagine if you have the tendency to want to torture creatures, to try and argue with that. It's quite hard when you get so much pleasure from it. That's the trouble with attachment, you see. So it's very hard to really know your own mind, and that's why we have to have discipline, isn't it? What else, people? So let's talk about, go back to death. Now let's look at the Vajrayana perspective, and it's in Rinpoche's book. We'll talk about the death process itself. What happens? Two things. What happens? How to prepare for the time of death, living your life well, and how to prepare for the things that arise as you're beginning to die, and then also becoming familiar with this actual deconstruction process that they describe in the Vajrayana tradition. And this is all the stuff of Rinpoche's book. So, okay, so this death process, as they call it, what's fascinating about it, and from the Vajrayana perspective, it's exactly the same thing that occurs every time we go to sleep. It's identical, physiologically and psychologically. It's exactly the same deconstruction process of the gradual deconstruction, first of the gross consciousness and the gross of physicality, the gross senses, then the subtle level of our consciousness, going all the way to what they call the very subtle. So to understand this model, then we need to understand the components of a person according to this model. So that we've got, as I've just said, first of all, we can divide the different levels of ourselves into gross consciousness, which is inextricably linked to our gross physicality, this bag of bones that we've got now. And that includes our sensory consciousness, the capacity of our mind to function through the medium of the nervous system and the eyeball and the tactile and the nerves and the tongue and the five senses, basically. So the consciousness, you know, the way to put it is very important. Well, actually, this is a really good point to make, first of all. The way we, as Lama Yeshe says, the way we make the body the boss. This is a really powerful point from the Buddhist perspective. And the point I'm going to make here is really showing, this is an incidental point now, this is an incidental point, but just to show the way the physicality works, you know, how we've got the sensory consciousness. Actually, no, I'll leave that for now. Let me leave that for now. It's going off to the side. We've got gross consciousness, which includes sensory consciousness, which clearly depends upon having eyeballs and nervous system and the tongues. You understand what I'm saying? That's the physicality, the gross level of consciousness linked to the gross physicality, which enables us to have sensory experiences. Then you've got subtle consciousness. And in terms of sleep, that arises once the grosser level has ceased and you now wake up, if you like, into the dream state. That's called your subtle consciousness. So if you're in a coma, it's exactly the same. That's your subtle consciousness. If when you dream, it's your subtle consciousness. We know it's a weird and strange world, and in our psychology, there's no real agreement what that is, you know. But it's very clear from the Buddhist perspective. It's a subtler level of your own consciousness. And it too is inextricably linked to a subtler level of physicality. Now this is the same model the Tibetan medical system uses, you know. And so this subtle physicality, the subtle body as they call it, it's made up of 72,000 subtle channels, like a subtle nervous system. It's physical, but you can't see it with your eyes. And then through these channels, throughout our body, are running all these different wind energies, the prana. And this is like the Hindu system is the same. The Chinese one to some degree is similar. And this is the basis of the health. So the Tibetan medical system is based on this. There's all these different wind energies, and they're all inextricably linked to our different states of mind. Now this sounds really weird for us when we think our mind is the brain, you know. But this is our consciousness, which is not physical, all these different levels of our mental consciousness, coursing through these channels, inextricably linked to the wind energies. As they say in Tantra, you know, the mind rides on the winds. So when you go to your Tibetan doctor and she feels your pulses, she'll feel exactly the imbalance of certain winds, which she knows are connected to your attachment, which is why your mind's berserk, like this big storm inside you, and you're having all these panic attacks and anxiety attacks. That's attachment energy gone berserk. And the wind energies are berserk, so the mind is berserk. So then they'll give you the herbal medicines, which work on the wind energies, very subtle, which calms your wind energies down, which then in turn helps your mind calm down, because the mind and the winds are inextricably linked. This is subtle level of our consciousness, subtle level of our physical being. We also at the subtle level, we also have these other components called these subtle red and white drops. They call them tigle in Tibetan, kundalini in Sanskrit. Lama would always use that word because people got excited about kundalini, you know. So it's basically what it is at the time of conception in your mother's fallopian tube or wherever it happens, I'm not sure. What happens is, we're going to go through this process, your very subtle consciousness leaves the intermediate state where you've gone after you died, and you're basically the karma to be born to your mummy and daddy is already planned weeks before. You're just waiting for them to hop into bed, you know. So when they do hop into bed or whatever happens, then what happens is your mind runs like a magnet to that and joins a subtle red and white drops, which are subtle components of the egg and the sperm. They're subtle physical energies contained in the egg and the sperm. So your very subtle conscious conjoins with that very subtle red and white drops, and that's the beginning of you. At that second, you begin, and then you start at your heart chakra, right in the center of your chest. So these channels, you've got 72,000 subtle channels, and of these channels you have a main channel, they call it the central channel, and it starts at your crown and goes down and ends at the penis for boys and the cervix for girls. Then you have two side channels that go from the nostrils and up, and then they go down the side, the central channel, and end in the same place. Then you have all these other millions of channels. So you've got different points starting at the crown where all these channels are constricted They're all kind of blocked. So that's called the crown chakra. Chakras aren't so fancy, but we think they're like special. It's where your channels are all blocked. It's a drag, actually. Then you've got chakra, a bunch of constricted channels there, here, at your throat, at your heart, right in the center of your chest, below your navel, and then 3 on the male along the penis, and inside, internally, for the woman in the channel where it ends at the cervix. So these different areas where the channels are all blocked. And this has got great significance in the process of death and indeed for great meditators. So the point, okay, so then we've got very subtle consciousness. So, okay, sorry, when you're conceived, your very subtle consciousness joins this very subtle red and white drop from the mummy and daddy, and then you begin at your heart chakra. That very subtle drop, the indestructible drop they call it, it stays there all your life, and then you begin there, and then you start to grow the fetus. They describe how the fetus develops in the womb, you know. So the death process is this reverse process where you end up at this very subtle drop at the heart chakra. So we'll go through that process now and describe it roughly what happens, this gradual deconstruction process. So, okay, so first, and this, it's hard to say, but as Rinpoche says in the book, it's probably a couple of hours, this process begins probably a couple of hours before you stop breathing. But it could be much longer and much shorter for people. It depends on the person, you know. So the first thing that occurs, there's 8 stages, and various things occur at each of those stages. There's like 25 components that in this gradual deconstruction process. So that at each of these stages, several of those cease to function. So at the first level, the earth element ceases to function. Now, you think when you're really tired, that's exactly what happens. Your body becomes like lead, doesn't it? Because your earth element is ceasing to function. That's the way they describe it. And you're really tired. Let's say I'm sitting there and I'm talking to Harald, and I'm really tired. My body begins to feel like lead. Well, that's the first stage. Your earth element ceases. And they even say your body, you know, even at some point you almost want to reach up as if your body's sinking into the earth. I remember when I was very sick in India in the 90s, I got hepatitis and malaria. But no one noticed the malaria because I was bright yellow. But I was having these hideous fevers day after day, and no one knew why, because they didn't recognize it was malaria fevers, and I was just losing I was out of my brain, you know. So I remember Kurti Center Rinpoche said I was close to death. I didn't know I was close to death, I just felt terrible. But I knew I had to get out of India, otherwise I would have died. It was the middle of summer, like 100 degrees, no AC, in this house in Delhi, like completely hallucinating, out of my brain, you know. Totally sick, bright yellow from hepatitis, and then also having these malaria fevers. So I knew I had to get out. I knew I had to get out of India. I'd die otherwise. And luckily, Air India let me fly bright yellow. You know, it was ridiculous. And I remember my sister Jan was so kind. She flew from Brisbane to Singapore, round trip, 24 hours, just to pick me up halfway. You know, she was so kind. And I remember in the hotel in Singapore having that experience, sinking into the bed. It gave me quite a shock. You know, sinking into the bed, my body. So they say that's a sign, the earth element, and that's at the stage of death, right? So the first stage, your earth element ceases, your body feels very heavy. They talk about 5 wisdoms. It's just simply meaning different capacities of how we function, usually through the medium of the senses, Rinpoche said. So this one here is the wisdom of, they call it, I forget. It's the capacity to hold a lot of information all at once. Like when we're wide awake right now, we can, if we just look through our eyes, we can see a million things, can't we? Many things are appearing to us. So this wisdom, this capacity to hold a lot of information begins to cease. And that we all know that experience. What's wrong? We okay?
That's why it's running out.
Running out. So we should stop then. Oh, it's tea time, is it? Okay, then we have tea. So then we'll carry on dying later. We have to put dying on hold and we'll do it later, okay? Okay, let's have a cup of tea. And we'll see you in 30 minutes. I think I'm going to have to sit here in my cloak. I can't get out. So I'll just read my iPad again. Okay. I'll leave the microphone on, as long as I don't move, okay? That means I have to get a cup of tea.